mentioned, this is using the ABE Instructional Framework for TABE. So here's what we're going to cover in this presentation. Just a real brief explanation as to why the ABE framework was created, why we should use the ABE framework, what it is, how to use it, and then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about lesson plans as they relate to the framework. Before we get started, I just want to put in a real quick plug for this morning's BTI session. It was called Implementing the ABE Framework and CASAS Goals to Improve Measurable Skills Gains. I realize this is for TABE and that presentation was for CASAS. However, I would encourage you to watch it once it is up on the archive. You may be able to use those concepts and those principles for TABE also. So just real quick, want to know how many of you have seen the ABE framework? If you could just put a Y or an N in the chat box, so I have an idea as to how many of you have seen it. Okay, so it looks like most of you have seen it and a few of you have not. Okay, it's what I expected. So thank you very much for your input. So just a real quick background. Back in the early 1990s, there was some accountability in this field, but there was honestly very little. Then in the middle of the 1990s, there was a pretty significant scandal that occurred at the DC National Chapter of the United Way of America. And that put donators sort of a little skeptical as to where their money was being spent. So United Way felt that they really needed to have some more accountability across the board. So they implemented the Kellogg Logic model, and that sort of created a ripple effect across all programs that work in human service type of organizations. Probably the biggest driving force is the performance measure outcomes. So right now, the sanctions for measurable skills gains is put on pause. However, it's going to happen, and we know that. So this is the time where if your measurable skills gains aren't where you want your program to be, this would be the time to ramp it up and to do whatever you can to try and get those scores up. So why should we use the ABE framework? Bottom line, quality instruction. It provides instructors with targeted instruction for those assessments. It lets instructors know what's going to be tested. If you don't know what your students are going to be tested on, it's hard to sort of target those skills for that assessment. And hopefully with that, we will see improved test scores. What is the ABE framework? We're going to get into the real crux of what is in the framework. First, brief overview that the college and career readiness standards is still considered the gold standard for guiding instruction. There are some states that have their own standards, but that's based on specific requirements for that state. Our state doesn't fall into that category, so we still use the college and career readiness standards as the gold standard. The thing to remember is that TABE 11 and 12 is aligned with the college and career readiness standards, and it also complies with the WIOA regulations. So while there are some programs that put some emphasis on the CCRS, it's not necessary to do so unless you feel it's needed and that's the direction you want your program to go in. There was a work group for putting this ABE framework together. One of the pieces of the framework that we felt would be the most helpful for instructors is the checklist. So there's a checklist for each of the 6 ABE levels. It is not just geared towards TABE. It is a compilation of all the skills found on TABE and CASAS, because honestly, they're skills that all students should have underneath their belt. This checklist provides instructors with the skills that are appropriate for that NRS level. So if you're teaching ABE 3 and 4, you know these are the skills that I need to be teaching at that level. It also provides the skills that are at the lower level. The student should already have those skills in place, or they should be able to quickly obtain those skills at your level. It also gives instructors a guide for where their students are going to. So think of this as a roadmap. The lower levels, where they started on their trip. The current level is where they are now in their destination, and the higher levels is their final destination. It also provides references to the lesson plans, which we'll talk about a little bit at the end of the presentation. Here's just an example. This is ABE 4. So it shows the scores for the TABE for reading, language, and mathematics. Language is on here because correction uses language, but we know that most programs do not. Here's a list of the reading skills that are appropriate for ABE level 4. You will also see here down at make inferences and draw conclusions, it says see Appendix A 84. That means if you are interested in a lesson plan that's geared towards making inferences and drawing conclusions, you can go to Appendix A, page 84, and you will see an example of a lesson plan. That doesn't mean that's the preferred lesson plan for the skill. It's just an example. Since we know that some instructors really struggle with knowing how to create an effective lesson plan. You'll see another one here, identify main idea and details from complex text. Again, another lesson plan. We also have math skills and functional and workplace skills. We separated out functional and workplace skills because some instructors struggle with knowing how to incorporate workplace skills into their lesson. Most of these skills come from the math assessment, but again, we separate them out just to help instructors. Again, we have under math, understand and apply the Pythagorean theorem. There's a lesson plan in Appendix A 96 to help instructors know how to create a lesson plan for that specific skill. Here's the real sort of meat and potatoes, you could say, of the framework. We took the framework and we created different formats. The framework, I will tell you, is quite lengthy. You will not need to use all of it, nor will you want to use all of it. We provided as much information in as many different formats as we could to make it easier for instructors to be able to pick out those pieces that work for them. So this part of the framework is just a real brief, broad picture of what is assessed at level L the reading in TABE. Phonological awareness is 23%, phonics and word recognition, another 23%, key details and key ideas and details, 28%, and so on. Underneath each one of those is a real brief description as to what skills are found within those broader categories. Because we know that many programs, just due to their size, in that they're small and they can't necessarily always have leveled classes, they have multi-level, we provided this chart so that they can see skills that may span more than one level. Therefore, an instructor could, for example, we have details that is assessed at level L, E, and M. If your class has, these three levels, that would be a good skill to work on because it spans those three levels. I want to make this point. I can't stress this enough. Just because these skills are assessed at these levels, it doesn't mean they don't need to have them at higher levels. We have here ask and answer questions about key details in a text. Of course, they need to have those skills still at levels E, M, D, and A, but it is primarily assessed at level L. Again, it's to help instructors know what skills are going to be assessed at the level of the students that they're teaching. Here's an example to show you how it progresses. We have main idea and details. At level L, all they have to do is just identify the main topic and retell key details in a text. All they're doing is just real basic identification. At level E, they're increasing those skills. Now they have to recount the key details and explain how they support the main idea. At level M, they have to summarize the text. At level D, they have to determine the central idea, analyze its development over the course of the text, including how it emerges and shaped and refined the details. I'm sorry, that was level A. At D, they had to determine the central ideas and conclusions among and distinctions between individuals and ideas or events. This shows, again, the progression. So if they're at level M, they can see what skills those learners should have already obtained, and they can see where they're moving towards. We did the same thing for math. This is just a piece of it because this only adds up to 51%, but it's the same idea. It shows the broad category, what percentage of that level is covered in that assessment, and then just real quick sentences to tell you a little bit more in depth what's covered in that broader topic. But again, this is just a broad picture to give you an idea as to what is assessed at that level. We did the same thing with math. Again, measurement and data is assessed at levels L, E, and M, but of course, they're still going to need to know that at levels D and A, but they're assessed at the lower levels. This is not what it looks like in the framework. I had to do some tweaking here to create this. This is just another example that shows the progression. So here we have geometry. They're just going to start off with composing 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional shapes to form a composite shape. Then they're going to have to identify triangles, quadrilaterals, pentagons, hexagon, and cubes, and moving on until finally they get to level A, where they have the complex skills of working with cylinders, pyramids, cones, and spheres. But again, it shows the progression where students start from and how they move through geometry until they get to level A. In the framework, we also included about the GED Test Competencies. We have the link there. We only included level 2 because, quite frankly, just getting through level 2 is a big enough hurdle for most learners. I'm going to talk about lesson plans. So we have 4 appendices. Appendix A is the lesson plans. It's just a variety of templates. They're examples only. We are not advocating or vetting any of these lesson plans as saying that they're better or preferred. It's just an example. Use the one that works for you or your program. And learning objectives can be drawn from the CCRS. Appendix B includes a chart that correlates the CCRS and the NRS EFL. This may not be helpful, but we included it for those who might find this to be helpful, especially for programs that focus on CCRS. This is for math, and then we did the same thing for the reading. Appendix C is that pretty complicated chart that some of you may have seen that's put out by the NRS. And those charts are included in the framework. Appendix D is the area of emphasis. So we took the the TABE blueprint and reworked it. This shows the areas of emphasis. The areas of emphasis that are the most frequent on that assessment are in green, medium is the peach, and then red means that it's the least frequently assessed on that level. That doesn't mean that they're not important. It just means that if you want to know where you might want to put most of your effort and your instruction, you might want to start with the high level areas of emphasis. I'm going to talk real briefly about lesson plans because they are included in the framework. At a minimum, your lesson plan should include a title, the objectives, what materials you're going to use, how you're going to present it, the application, and how you're going to evaluate it. I'm going to show you 3 examples, just work through them real quickly to give you an idea as to what's included in the framework. This one is the lesson on making inferences, and it's ABE level 4. She included the duration and the CCRS standard. That's because at this program, that's the requirement. So if it's required at your program, include it in your lesson plan. You want to include an objective that ideally you should state at the beginning of your class to your learners, whether it's verbally putting it on the board. Do something so that your students know what the purpose of the lesson is. She included her materials and technology and how she's going to present this topic. She also included the practice in detail, how she's going to assess this, and what the homework is. You ideally, again, want to have some activity that they do beyond the class that gives them practice on their own, just to help them cement those ideas and concept when they have time on their own to think about those skills. We're going to look at another one. This is sources of law. Again, She included the title, how long it's going to take. Instead of putting the standards or competencies, she listed out the skills. It's just another way to do a lesson plan. She included a brief description of the topics. Again, the objectives. What do you want your students to be able to do at the end of the lesson? And the materials. She has a step-by-step detailed instruction of how she's going to present this, the practice and the assessment, and then also some follow-up. Again, this is having students do some activity beyond the lesson to further cement. She also included some modifications, including working in small groups and popcorn reading. For those who may not know, popcorn reading is where you just randomly pick on students, call on students to read from the passage. And then she included her source. And the last one we're going to look at is this one. It's pretty all-encompassing, all on one page. The setup is a little bit, I know this is Cass's, but I included it just for the sake of demonstration purposes. So she included the Cass's competencies. We have the CCRS anchor, because again, this program requires a connection to the CCRS. And she included the GED skills because this is an NRS level 5. And also vocabulary. Again, the objectives, how you're going to present it, the presentation, the practice, and how you're going to apply it. She has a detailed list of the materials and also how to assess it. So I would say in the framework, the two pieces, if you're going to focus on anything, are the checklists and the lesson plans. The charts are great for, again, knowing how to show progression, but the checklists really give you a real focused approach that can at least get you started until you get deeper into the framework. So I am going to, actually, let me put this up real quick. You will get, you'll see a copy of this, but I encourage anybody to please reach out to me if you have any questions about the framework, how to use it, even about the lesson plans. Email is the best way to get a hold of me. So again, please reach out to me. So does anybody have any questions on this? I know it's sort of a lot, but I wanted to just give a real brief overview and just cover what it looks like. You obviously can look through the framework on your own time. And like I said, please feel free to reach out to me. I love talking about instruction. So I'm going to turn it back over to Doug.
Thank you so much, Ramona.